Okay, you're right.
My name is Beverly Sanders, and today is Monday, February 15th, 2016. I'm visiting today with Venita MacGorman in McFarland Memorial United Methodist Church in Norman, Oklahoma. Joe Sanders will be assisting with the recording equipment and sometimes adding a question. This interview is for the historical records of McFarland United Methodist Church, as well as the Voices of Oklahoma United Methodism project of the Oklahoma Conference Oral History Research Program. This research program is coordinated through the Commission on Archives and History with the support of the Oklahoma United Methodist Historical Society. Venita, we certainly do appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today and share some of your memories of experiences here at McFarland. Would you start by just introducing yourself? Tell us about yourself and your family.
Okay. I'm Venita MacGorman. My husband, Don, is the reason why we moved to Norman. He works for the National Severe Storms Laboratory. He's a lightning specialist.
Oh.
And we have two daughters, Erin and Kristen. Erin is an organist, and she's a board-certified music therapist. Right now, she's the life enrichment expert. I think that's the word at the geriatric division of Mercy Hospital in Iowa City. And Kristen is on a second career thing. She started out with a master's degree in music and worked in music management for a while, and now she's in her last semester working on a master's degree in occupational therapy.
Would you like to tell where that your other daughter learned to play the organ?
Oh, the Erin's first organ teacher here was Dr. Sam Porter, and she'd taken a lot of piano, was very interested in piano, and Sam just did such a good job of nurturing kids, and he would let all the kids come up and play around on the organ after church service, and she got really interested in organ through Sam. And then Sam actually not only was the organist for her wedding, but he wrote the wedding march for her wedding.
So she didn't have the traditional wedding march?
No, she didn't.
Oh.
She had a special one. And I was very touched. Last week we were in Iowa City at the church where Erin goes now, and her daughter Amber is 6, and at the end of the service, Amber ran up to the organ, and the organist said, "Come sit on the bench and mess around." So, there's another generation thing there with somebody taking the time to show a child.
I can remember her practicing on the organ there in the sanctuary here.
Yeah.
And talk about grandchildren.
Erin has 2 little girls. Amber is 6, just turned 6, and Lyndon is almost 8 months.
Oh my goodness. So she's starting early with her musical interest then.
Yeah, it's kind of in their family. Erin's husband Lucas has a degree in trombone, and then also has degrees in computer science. He's working as a software tester. So yeah, music's an important part of their life. And Kristen got married last August to a very nice man that she actually met in the choir at St. Stephen's, which is a very good place to meet a spouse.
I think that's a good place to meet your spouse.
Yeah, right.
I met mine here at McFarland.
Okay.
A long time ago. I had another question along that line right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, let's go on to, would you tell us how you came to Norman and how you became associated with McFarland after you got in Norman?
We moved here in late 1979. Don took a position here, and which he still has. He's been at the Severe Storms Lab the entire time we've been here. I entered grad school to work on my master's in music education. Our choir director in Houston that we moved from, Alan Pote, was a good friend of John Yarrington's, and he said, "You really need to go hear his choir, and you need to go meet John. So at some point I finally did, and John asked me to play flute on an anthem that the children's choir was doing at the Candlelight Carol service. Okay, so I didn't know what sort of crowd happens at the Candlelight Carol service, and he didn't warn me. And it was sleeting, and there was ice coming down. The service started at 7. I left my house at 6:30. I got here at 6:40, 6:45, which should have been plenty of time. There was no parking anywhere. I parked up behind what's the president's house, walked in the ice all the way to the church, came in just as the anthem was finishing.
Oh my.
I had missed it. So yeah, that's my start with McFarland. And then John told me that actually he was getting ready to move to Dallas pretty soon. Anyway, we visited several churches, and then our neighbors, Bob and Sherry Butler, kept inviting us to come to McFarland, and I visited the choir and really liked Michael Richardson and stuff, and so we started coming then, and then Michael left. I really didn't chase off choir directors. I just started just as they were leaving. When Perry White came on, Phil was looking for a volunteer to do the children's choirs, and I had just finished my master's degree and had I was teaching very, very part-time because Kristen was a baby, and he taught me into volunteering with the children's choir.
You were just you were teaching part-time in the public schools, or teaching just music?
No, I was teaching orchestra at a private school at George Cross Academy.
I see it.
Very, very part-time.
Yeah. And one thing, let's identify. John Yarrington was the choir director when you first came to Norman, the one who started the Candlelight Carol services, and celebrated their 50th anniversary this past Christmas. Michael Richardson was the choir director who followed John, right? There was nobody in between the two of them.
No, and Mike wasn't there very long. I think maybe 2 or 3 years, I think, not very long. Because I kind of got in on the end of both of them.
Okay, and Phil, you mentioned Phil Finn, of course, was our minister, starting in 79, I believe it was.
Something like that.
79,
Yeah.
And was here for...
Because he was new when we first started visiting here, right? He was the new guy.
Okay, now if we can get back, think where we were when I...
Okay, and I said, I was volunteering as the children's choir director when Perry White started as...
I see, okay.
Music director. Perry had not worked with children much in the past, and so they asked me to volunteer as the younger children's choir director. Perry was doing the 4th and 5th grade, and I did K1 and 2. And then the following year, they opened a half-time position for associate director of music, and hired me then to coordinate the children's music ministry, to do the junior high bell choirs, and to work with the instrumental music. So that was my job description as it started, and then it got
up until then
bigger.
There had not been any associate directors. It was just one music director.
There was not an official associate director of music.
Not as a staff position.
No, there were some piecemeal ones. There was a paid bell choir director, Randy Hengst, did 2 or 3 bell choirs, and the first there was a children's choir director. I learned about it from the banners. There was a children's choir director, I'm thinking in the early 40s maybe. It was Mary Catherine Taylor.
Yes, that's,
And Nicholson's mother, right,
Yes,
okay.
uh-huh.
Mary Catherine was on staff as children's choir director and something else, and I don't,
Was she also an organist?
she wasn't the church organist. That's my cell phone.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have
She and her
turned it off.
sister were both involved. I'm not sure who held a staff position.
Mary Catherine had a staff position.
She and her sister also, I can't think what her sister's name was. But anyway, we did an audio interview with them a good many years ago, in '99, I believe it was, when we were doing the anniversary.
I'm sorry, I will turn this off.
Okay.
I cannot remember her sisters, but they had been involved in things here at the church and in the Wesley Foundation.
Okay.
I don't remember what all, but I was amazed when I interviewed them.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
but
Mary Catherine had two positions at the church, and I want to say it was a secretarial or something, but then she added to it as children's choir director.
I see. Mhm.
Uh,
I'm thinking that she was in the office, because a lot of her comments I recall were about the office
Yeah.
and how things were running in the office. In fact, I well, I know I won't quote her. I might quote her wrong.
Okay, yeah, but
Oh.
I talked to her once when she was 90, I think, and she was fascinating. And then she gave me some music books, some teaching books and things. So I wasn't the first children's choir director. I wasn't the first bell choir director, but it was the first time that those were put together
I
in a
see.
position that was
Uh-huh.
called associate director of music.
Okay. Mhm. Okay, so I think we covered all the background. Are we ready to go into some of the innovations and the ideas that you either developed or began or developed or continued
Sure.
to develop after you got here? So if I just let's start with the Wednesday afternoon activities. Were those one of the first things that kind of got started? And,
Because my initial charge was to build up the children's choir program, which had the children's program and the middle school program over the course of a few years had really kind of hit bottom. The year that I was a volunteer, there were less than 30 children, kindergarten through 5th grade. And I felt like part of the problem with that was just that the time that they were offering it was convenient for the staff, but it wasn't convenient for the parents. It was Tuesday afternoons from something like 4 to 4:30 or something. And people that worked or their children were in an after-school program or something simply couldn't get them there. And it really wasn't long enough for people to feel like, gee, it's worthwhile to pay somebody to take my child to school, take them to choir, pick them up choir, and then keep them till I get off work. And the reality was then, and of course it's more so now, that parents work, and parents, for the most part, aren't available until 5. So I added the other piece to children's choir that was discovery time. And that was kind of loosely interpreted as a period of Christian education, some fine arts, just kind of whatever we wanted to make it. Initially, I started out with the kindergarten, 1st and 2nd graders. I'd have them for 45 minutes, and then I would do their discovery time for another 45 minutes. Perry did the older children for 45 minutes, and then somebody did discovery time for him, and I've forgotten who.
some volunteers, like
It was a volunteer, yes.
Gwen,
And
not Gwen Lovell.
no, this was before Gwen Lovell was
really?
a children's choir director. The first year that I did choir, Phyllis
St. John.
St. John was children's choir was children's director.
I see.
And then later on, Gwen did have a role in. So it was volunteers
Uh-huh.
for Perry, and I don't remember who it was. The children's choir program more than doubled the year that we did that, simply because it was easier for
Sure.
parents to get their kids to school. We also had a big meeting where I'd put pieces of paper on the board saying Monroe School, McKinley School, whatever, and we'd work out carpools. And then two schools that first year, Monroe and Cleveland, we couldn't get a carpool worked out because there just was nobody that was free to do it. So we got a couple of volunteers to drive church vans to pick up the kids from that school. And of course then it snowballed because then transportation even made it easier. So after the first year of doing it like that, we had to split the choirs farther, and I did K and 1, and then I did second and third grade, and somebody else did discovery time, and I believe by then it was Gwen Level. Did discovery time on the times when the other group had choir. Eventually we had to split it even farther, and so we split into the way it is now, where K and 1 are kind of their own entity, where they have shorter periods and they have a 3-point rotation. And then the older kids, second grade's by itself and third grade's by itself, and then fourth and fifth are together, just to keep the numbers workable. And then discovery time became its own entity with its own
But choir is still a
curriculum.
part of
Oh yeah, but
the
choir
music
was
program.
still the
center.
exactly half of the rotation. And when we had, like the Sunday before, big events like Palm Sunday or Candlelight Carol Service or the musical or something, we would combine all the kids together and then, redo the schedule. We were flexible. And the program tripled really quickly. And I know that we did get some children whose parents were simply using us for free after school care. And I knew to that at the time, but I also thought that it was worth it.
Oh, yes.
Sure.
Anything you do, you have a lot that are using it for
free childcare.
childcare, and yet you're
yeah.
still accomplishing your purpose with the children.
Right. And and in some of those, in some cases, that was the only contact with the church that those children ever had. And so I still thought that it was a good thing to do.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And now, by the time this was established into this form, this was about when?
Let's see, I came on staff in '83, so by 1985 it was in its current form. And, they may have made some changes since then, but I know that basically you still have the same schedule on the same Wednesday afternoon.
Okay.
You have more vans now, which helps.
Lots of them. And I think that pickup at school is well established by now.
Right.
In fact, I have ridden with one of the drivers sometimes as we went to pick up children at one of the schools. Then I think probably growing out of that was this thing with the banners, or the All Saints Day banners. Is that correct?
And this was pretty early on too. I'm a member of the Choristers Guild, which is an organization of church musicians, and we get this monthly magazine. And a person had put an article in about celebrating All Saints Day with children, and she had the children make banners to honor not just the saints on the saints calendar, but people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and people that, and John Wesley, people that were giants in the faith that she thought the children should learn about. And so I think we want to take it one step further and honor the people who have come before them in this church, so that they would know why they had what they had, why this building came, why this church came, so that they would understand some of their own church history. So I invited people to submit the names of, and understand that the dynamic was a little bit different the first few years it was done, because you had 50 years worth of people to remember, not just 1 year. So I asked people to submit names of somebody that they considered one of the saints of the church, somebody who had a role in McFarland history, or somebody that was a member of their family, and to give me some information about them or their lives or their role in the church, something that we could illustrate on a banner.
And that would have been about,
I believe that was 1985,
okay.
around then.
And so far as we know, you were that there was nobody else doing this kind of thing in churches that you know of at the time?
Not that I know of,
Has
no.
Has anybody else picked it up?
I've not seen it. I've seen a number of people do the tintinnabulums, where you and we do this at St. Stephen's. I've seen this at a number of churches, and this is actually a tradition. It goes back to the medieval church, where you have this thing that's like a double cross, and people write the names of someone they want to remember on a ribbon, and then they attach a bell to the ribbon, and people process in with the tintinnabulum, with the names and the bells.
Okay.
And that's moving too, but it doesn't have the picture. And of course you have to have a building where you can hang the banners too. But my objects, my main object was for this to be an educational experience for the children, not necessarily to produce the world's most beautiful banners. And so I'd divide the children up into groups, and say 3 or 4 children would be assigned to one banner. And they would read or have read to them what we had learned about this particular person. And then they decided how to symbolize the person's life. And then the information that I had gotten on the person, I put on a little card and stapled to the back of the banner, so they could remember. And so they would come up with symbols. We had coloring books and stuff where you'd find some of the pictures and things. And then over the course of the years, we saved those symbols out of coloring books so that you didn't have to start over. And some of them, were better looking than others, but they were children's efforts. And the children remembered. I loved hearing them talk when they were making these. Well, my person was this and this, and my person, and it was somebody that had died a long time before they were born.
So you're going to tell us about some of them, something that about the people here.
Yeah, these are 3 of
Tell us
the
what the
original
symbols mean.
banners. And I believe that, I know this one has been redone because it was so faded.
Oh, yes.
That green. This one has been redone. But what I remember about these people, Kate Brooks was mentioned by more people than anybody else, and I'm talking by a lot, but dozens and dozens of people said, well, you have to have a banner for Kate Brooks. And I'd say, and what did she do? What was her role in the church? And nobody knew. They would all say, well, she had the most sunny personality. She was the kindest person. She would greet everybody that came in the door. She knew the names of all the children, but nobody knew any facts about her. But I thought, what a wonderful way to be remembered. And so the sun was because of her personality. We put a cross and flame because she was a Methodist, and we knew that. And then the person with the extended hand was because they said she was so friendly. So that there isn't a lot on this, but I hope that's one that if it wears out, they keep redoing. Because I think that's an important person. Ollie Wallace was a woman who was blind in her old age. She founded a prayer group in the church, and that's why the praying hands. The open Bible is because she, people said, had an incredible knowledge of Scripture, and they said that even though she was blind, she had committed so much of the Bible to memory that she could always tell you where the quote was that you wanted, where the quote that you needed. So I thought that one was special. Alice Chapman was the church secretary under one of the early ministers, and I've forgotten which one. If you tell me the names of them, I'll probably pull it out.
How early?
Really early.
Like there was a Smith, Robert Smith. I think there was a Turner. And of course, there was Crutchfield, Finest Crutchfield.
It may have been Finest Crutchfield. Who came after Finest Crutchfield?
The one who was here the one that left soon after we got here.
No.
No.
Okay. Must have been Finest Crutchfield then. But she was secretary, and she accompanied him to, he started the custom of taking communion to people in nursing homes here, and she was his assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why we have the communion cup here, because that was, and apparently she did all the getting it ready and lining it up and everything, and all he had to do was show up, and she went with him. The son, again, she was somebody that everybody said had such a sunny and friendly personality. She started an organized system for visiting shut-ins, and I believe that came out of her initial visiting with the pastor to serve communion. But she started an organized system of visitors to shut-ins, so that's why you, and actually, okay, a child did this one. This is backwards. She's supposed to be holding out her hand to the person sitting in the wheelchair, but it's backwards. But you know, it's interesting history of people that don't show up in histories. You know, it's not the staff members, it's not the clergy, it's not, we've got banners for mayors, and we've got banners for a lot of well-known people in the community, but it's interesting that these three that you pulled and that I remember were just outstanding members of the congregation.
Were there any done for, like the McFarlands, or for any of the ministers, Dr. Crutchfield?
There are banners for all of the deceased McFarland members, ministers. And there's a story about the Crutchfield one, but you might want to turn the thing off. You want to? You can edit it if you don't want it.
No, let's tell it to refresh.
What?
Okay. Go back and tell us.
Okay, go ahead.
That well, some people want to keep the banner that was made for their loved one, and so we always gave it to them, and I assume they still do, and then we would just make another one. George Martin's daughter, Mary Rivas, brings his every year for All Saints Day, but then she takes it home and has it hanging in a special place in the house, and I think that a lot of people have done that too.
And George Martin's wife has died since then,
Right,
right?
and there is a banner for her too, and so I imagine Mary probably takes both of them.
I imagine so. Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. I never knew so much about the banners before. There's so much to be known about them.
Well, they're an incredible history lesson, and that's it. Also, it's touching to see a child carry it in. You know, it looks like it's generations meeting, but I think my original purpose for it was educational, because I think it's important for children to learn who people
and
were.
those children probably grow up remembering that person's name.
I
even though they
talk with my girls about that, and I remember something. You know, so yeah.
And before we start all this, you were talking about the need for some kind of a project to actually get a written history on some of these people.
I wish you would do that, because they've changed how they do this now, and they don't. Well, and of course, a lot of the original things have fallen off, and here we've got the cardboard, but there's nothing on it, and some of them probably faded. But the children don't make them anymore. They've got a committee that
Right,
does.
I think I knew that.
And so I'd like to see you research before people forget who Alice Chapman and Kate Brooks are, because I don't think you have any of their contemporaries anymore. Find out who they are and find out a little bit about them and attach them to the banners, and then maybe at least the children that carry them in would have a chance to read it.
So initially, in the beginning, people would write a little bit about that person as they were requesting it, but those writings that they gave you were not kept and filed or anything like that.
No, they were attached to the banner,
Just,
and I didn't think of
we never
keeping
thought of
another thing too. Remember, we didn't have computers then either.
Yeah,
It was
computers make everything so much easier, and you can store
Yeah.
so much more so easily.
And so we did keep a list, and I know you have a list of all of the banners, but not what's on them.
Yeah. Well, after we get all of our other histories written, we have to
Yeah,
go into.
right.
have to
Of
go
course, then the history keeps happening.
We're looking for somebody that's gonna be relieving us eventually. We're not gonna last that much longer.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about history, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, okay, I think probably from there we need to go on to, would the vacation choir camps and the retreats be the next logical
Okay.
topic to talk about?
Yeah, actually, I started Vacation Choir Camp. That was the very first thing I did.
And this was your innovation, there was nobody, it was not
No,
already
we not
done.
had that before. I started work here August 1st, and I think we, in 1983, and I think we had the choir camp like the next week or something. So I'd obviously been planning it, before I actually came to work on it. We needed something to jumpstart our children's choir program. And even though we were changing the schedule and stuff, I thought the summer was a good time to do it. At the time, McFarland didn't have our own VBS. We were doing the ecumenical one at different churches. And so and it was always right after school was out. So I thought in August, after it's a long time since VBS is out, the ball teams have all finished having their tournaments and stuff, and kids have had time to start getting bored before school starts. Let's do just a choir camp, just a music camp. And I knew that parents would send them to something at the church to get them out of the house in the summer. And I thought that if we could show the kids that choir was a fun thing to do, and that it was more than just singing, that it was instruments and dancing and movement and a lot of other things too, that it would help recruit for choir. And it did. And every year we got children that would come to choir camp with a friend that would then come back for choir. We then, and I'm sure now still, had the most incredible group of volunteers. We had school teachers that couldn't volunteer with children's choir during the year because we started before they got off, but they were willing to come and give their time right before teacher in-service started. And so we always had an incredible staff of people that knew how to work with children. And we offered, the electives that we offered each year kind of depended on who we had available. But we would do some singing in individual groups and then put everybody together to do something, to do an anthem or something. And then one day during the week, have a party at Skateland, and then on Friday have a luncheon to show the parents what we've sung and the artwork and stuff. So it started out as something to try to recruit for children's choir, and then I think it kind of took on a life of its own too.
And it's still going and strong.
And we turned the Sunday after choir camp became Children's Sabbath. There was, and I don't remember when, but I would say early 90s, there was a bishop's initiative to declare one Sunday a year Children's Sabbath, and to either focus on children's issues or to focus on the children in your church. So we made the Sunday after choir camp Children's Sabbath, and the children did everything in the service except preach. And one year, actually, Phil had a panel of children that he just talked to.
Wow.
And that was interesting, and was a lot of hard work on his
Oh, I
part.
think so.
you know.
Oh, wow.
But in various ways, the children did everything in the service. And of course, the choir loft was then full of children, plus they were sitting out and on all over the podium, and people would have to pick their way among all these little children to speak. But that was kind of the natural closing to it. One year, we invited the children from the First American Church, the Native American Church, to do a joint choir camp with us, because they had a young woman named Kathy Longhat that was a ministerial candidate and was also quite a musician. And I had met her, and she asked if we could do this. So she taught them how to sing Jesus Loves Me in Choctaw, I think. And they sang with us, and they sang with us on Sunday morning. And then after that, they kind of started their own summer thing that's not exactly a VBS, not exactly a choir camp, but kind of something in between.
Right, they have quite a involvement with their children, I believe.
Yes, they
Still
do. They do. And actually, what kind of surprised us was, and I'd forgotten about this, but you're saying that triggered this, a large number of the parents came with the children to choir camp. And so we'd have the children in the front of the room, and then the room would just be circled with parents. And that just wasn't something that had been part of the culture here before that.
The retreats, the Wesley Choir retreats, I take it was probably something, a different entity than, because that would have been the older children.
That was the middle school group, yeah. I took them over. Perry was doing them when I first started working here, and I did the middle school bell choirs. And then he, as things grew, he turned the Wesley Choir over to me, and the way we worked it, which worked well for a number of years, and then we kind of had to change schedule things. I assisted him with chapel choir, and he assisted me with Wesley Choir. So the boys whose voices were changing could get some extra help with Perry. The Wesley Choir had gone strong under John Yarrington. It had died after he came. Perry started it up again, and he got it up to about a dozen, and then said, okay, you take it over because you like middle school kids, because that's what I had taught all those years was middle school. And so when I took him over, I wanted to find something that was uniquely theirs. The high school kids had choir tour. The little ones are cute, and everybody loves them, and they had their Wednesday afternoon thing and their musical and all that. The middle school kids aren't cute, and they're not high school, and they needed something that was there, something. So the retreat was kind of like the idea with choir camp to recruit. At the time, I was also band director at Irving Middle School, and so I really knew how to deal with middle school boys. And so the idea was, we'll take them on a retreat to a camp, and we're going to do all the fun camp activities, and it's before school, so you're going to meet some friends before you go to school. But the catch is, if you go on this retreat, you are required to sing during the retreat. You have to sing at all the choir times, and you have to learn how to ring bells. And middle school kids will do things that they're required to do. If you ask them, do you want to sing in a choir? No. Do you want to ring in a bell choir? No. But on this retreat, they were required to. And so there was no, it's not cool to do it because, I'm sorry, I have to do it. Well, then they'd go on the retreat and they'd find out, okay, yeah, boys really do sing in choir and they really do ring bells. And it gave them a confidence level that they didn't have before. And so it was a good recruiting tool for middle school kids. It really helped grow that
The
choir.
retreat included both girls and boys.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like I'm remembering at one point that the boys' choir that age was separate from the girls.
That was not with me. That was under Michael Richardson, and he had somebody else. He did the boys, and somebody else did the girls. And oddly enough, the Wesley boys continued, and the Wesley girls died. And then he stopped.
Then the girls came
I don't
back
know
after.
what. Yeah.
But the girls were involved in the retreats as well as the boys.
When we started doing the retreat, it was for everybody, and it was it was a recruitment tool. I also started finding a service project that the middle school kids could do that nobody else did, so that there was something that would make them feel unique. In a couple of cases, we sang for some small Oklahoma churches that had no choirs. When Bridgeview opened, our Wesley Choir was their choir for the first month or two. We did a lot of nursing home projects. The biggest one that they did, and the one that was the most popular for them, was at one time McFarland did worship services at Griffin Memorial Hospital once a month. And once a year, the Wesley Choir took over the whole worship service, even the speaking, even the preaching. They did everything. And we did a whole lot of music. We did a whole lot of responsive readings. And, I tell people, okay, you've got middle school kids who have no filters on what they'll say. You have patients at Griffin Hospital who have no filters on what they'll say. And they work together very, very well. The patients there would look forward every year to when we would come. We had to stop it because Griffin instituted a policy, and this would have been around 2005, 2006, where they did not allow visitors under the age of either 16 or 18. And of course Wesley was middle school, so we had to stop that one. And we changed it and did an entire worship service at a nursing home, once at the Veterans Center, at different places. But nothing was ever as big of a hit as that Griffin service. It was an amazing thing. And then I also, with the Wesley Choir, started at the end of the year having their own Wesley concert, where they would give a spring program, and then they'd be a cookies and punch reception for the families after it, so that it would be that choir and those bell choirs. And it wasn't part of the children's program, and it wasn't something with the high school program, so that all the attention was focused on the middle school. And the middle school program did grow and it did blossom. The biggest year that we ever had, there were over 60 in that middle school group. We had to move out of the choir room because there weren't enough chairs, and we had to go into to Meyer Hall. But I don't think I know it was never, once it really got going, it was never under about, I think 35 was probably the average.
It's wonderful.
And, you figure that's a really crucial age in people's development. And
Oh, yeah.
it's important for them to have, I think it's important for them to hear sacred music because that's what sticks in their head.
Oh, yes.
And I think of all the years, the middle school is probably the most crucial for that.
I think so too.
Nina, I seem to remember some story about a Christmas visit to a nursing home. Was that that age group, or was it something unusual happened or anything about
Christmas Day or
No,
Christmas season?
Well, it's Christmas season. They were singing, and this particular woman responded to it. If I'm not mistaken.
There were several of those times. I'm not pulling one particular one in. We also, one point, did a worship service at the prison in Lexington.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they would let them in there.
We had to have a certain number of adults, and they had to be searched, and it was, yeah. I'm not pulling in exactly which Christmas.
What I was remembering was something about that some woman had not been responsive until they were singing, and she started singing with them.
I know what you're talking about, and that, yeah, she started singing Silent Night. It was a woman that was, they thought was not exactly, well, they thought was vegetative, almost, but she did start singing Silent Night. That wasn't one of the choir groups exactly. Catherine Selman, Ellen Davis, and I all had children the same age, and during the Christmas vacation, we took them to a number of nursing homes just to sing Christmas carols. And that's when that particular thing happened, and then Catherine wrote it up for the transcript, and I think she won that Christmas con. So that's what you're,
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Exactly what it was.
Exactly. You talked about the Wesley Spring concert, and somewhere along the line, the children's
now
spring
that
program
predated
developed.
me, that the children had always done a spring program.
Okay, all this before that they had.
At the end of the year. And one thing that Kathy Mash instituted was having the Family Ministries Committee do the reception
Lunch
afterwards,
and cookies.
which the parents really appreciated
Oh,
because
yes.
they'd been doing it for them. And no, I did many musicals in Meyer Hall, and then it was a big deal when we finally got to have him in Fenn Hall.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, that had been going on, I think, as long as there was whenever there was a children's choir, because again, Mary Catherine talked to me about doing spring plays and
Okay,
stuff.
so that had been going on for a long time. Now, as we're talking about this, you said you started that you came to a halftime position. It sounds like you're getting busier and busier. Did your position ever grow into full-time or
Yeah,
three-quarter?
I was full-time for about the last maybe 10 years.
Okay.
It went from half to 2/3 to 3/4 to something like 7/8.
Oh, my goodness.
I mean, seriously.
Oh, gracious.
And then finally full-time, yeah.
Of course, being on the finance, I can imagine as it
Right.
creep along, as we got more money and whatnot, we
Right.
were able to.
Well, in particular, I think as they saw the good programs that were coming, they must have seen the need for you know, to have you more and more. So-
I think so. The music program grew, and there's so much that you can ask volunteers to do,
Oh, yeah.
and we just had a need for more professional staff, and things. Sometimes you needed one skill, and sometimes you needed a different skill, and it was interesting. One thing I don't remember if I put when I told you about things was when Jake Goff first started
Oh, yes.
coming through the programs
Better
here.
explain Jake Goff.
Jake and Emily, but were both hearing impaired, and Jake in particular was very, very much an extrovert, and would come in Sunday school and just love everybody, but could not communicate with them. and they had interpreters for them. Well, I had been at a summer camp, a summer music camp, and they had a signing choir, and I took some beginning sign and didn't know very much, but I knew how to sign the phrase, sing with your hands. And so one day, Jake was in middle school, and I guess he was in 6th grade, and he was coming to youth because Clarice Smith, now Clarice Moore, was youth director, and she signed. And we, for some reason, switched times of youth and choir one night. So he thought he was showing up for youth, and he ended out in choir. And he was just, what did it? So I signed, come sing with your hands, because that was the only sentence I knew in sign. So he got a piece of music out and sat down and started signing the words. And I thought, oh, this is really cool. So we then worked it to where the interpreter would come to choir too. Well, then he wanted to be in bells, and the interpreter wasn't free and stuff. So I took 2 levels of sign language at the VOTEC to just communicate with him. And one thing that I learned was that it had a lot more effect if I would sign leave her alone than if the interpreter would, you know. He would behave a lot better. So he went all the way up through the bell program and through the choir program until he graduated from high school. Emily started in choir a lot younger because we'd already had all this experience. And Emily started when I think she was maybe 3rd or 4th grade and signed. But it was a wonderful experience for the rest of the kids too. A lot of them learned some sign, and a lot of them learned a whole lot of patience. But yeah.
I thought what you were going to tell about Jake was going to be when we got the new organ.
And yeah, and he would go, I can feel it.
Yeah, he felt the vibration of it, and I remember him turning around that first Sunday, turning around and looking up there.
Because he could feel it. Well, there's a lot of Jake stories. There was one at a Christmas bell concert where he was sitting back in the congregation because his bell choir wasn't ringing then, and another group was ringing, and they couldn't find one of the bells. And they're looking for it, and Jake, from his vantage point halfway back, could see where the bell was under the table. And so I was where I could see him, so he just stood up and signed to me, look over there under the table. And yeah, and there was the bell. Yeah, we have a lot of.
And of course, Jake and Emily are both grown now and have children, and Don and Gwen are proud grandparents.
Right.
And so that's wonderful. And then we're going to talk about some of the family activities, the family choir on Christmas Eve and the family Ash Wednesday services, and I'm not sure if there were others or not.
I started some intergenerational groups because I just like intergenerational groups. I like to see families doing things together. The Ash Wednesday service started because choir was on Wednesday, and I would be trying to tell the kids what Ash Wednesday was, and then hope that they would come back in the evening to the service. And they almost never did, and parents said, well, that's just not a child-friendly service. And so I started kind of writing my own child-friendly liturgy with responses and stuff. And I would tell them ahead of time what was going to happen, and then we at 4:30 would stop choir, and whatever parents could come would come. And somebody at one point started advertising this family service at OU, and we would have some students that would come too. But we would have a child-friendly liturgy and an Ash Wednesday service, and then would close it by having everybody stand in a big circle around the sanctuary and hold hands and sing Jesus Loves Me. But a lot of parents found a lot of meaning in doing that with their children. When we started trying to have a Christmas Eve service that was more family friendly, more child friendly, we considered having a children's choir, a special one that would just sing for Christmas Eve. And I just thought, and I guess it's because my thinking of doing things with my own girls, on Christmas Eve, I didn't want to send them to choir practice. I wanted to do things with them. So I had the idea that we would have a choir of an intergenerational choir of parents and children and grandparents, and in some cases children that weren't really old enough to sing much except an occasional word. But we started doing that for the 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, whatever. I forgot what time your children's service is, but for the children's Christmas Eve service to have the family choir. And then I started in the summer having an intergenerational bell choir. And again, that was partially recruiting, partially just because it was fun. And I'd always get some parents that went, well, gee, my kids get to be in bells, and they always talk about what fun it is, and I've not gotten to do it. So the kids would bring their parents and enjoy knowing more than they did.
One thing that I particularly remember, it just stuck in my mind because it seems so unusual, was when you took a set of bells, and I cannot remember the country you took it to.
Ukraine, yeah.
And taught them how to use them.
Yeah, that's actually kind of taken on a life of its own that's come around in a circle. I'll tell you about that. I, at the time, was a national officer on the Handbell Guild. And so my name was on their website as a mentor for handbells. There was a group of doctors from North Carolina who every year since the fall of communism had gone to the city of Lviv in Ukraine and set up a medical dental eye clinic for 2 weeks, not every summer, every fall. And then they sent some other teams during the year, but this particular one concentrated on that. The church, they worked out of the First Baptist Church of Lviv, and, well, okay, this group of doctors were Baptist. The church was the first evangelical church of Ukraine, of Lviv, which basically meant it was Protestant as opposed to Ukrainian Orthodox. At that time, you were one or the other. They had this beautiful church building that had at one time been a Ukrainian Orthodox church with an organ and beautiful woodwork and everything. And then during the communist era, it was turned into a stable. And so things were, destroyed. Okay, it was back being a church again. The organ had been long taken out, chopped up, splintered. They had a piano that had most of the keys, and that was kind of it for a musical instrument. But incredibly musical congregation. They had a men's choir that was just to die for, and they wanted musical instruments. So this group of doctors got the idea of taking handbells because they're portable, and they thought that's a good education tool for children. They got a group of a set of the hand chimes donated, and took them 1 year, and then the next year they got a full set of bells donated. And then they realized that none of them, one, would really have time on the trip to teach anybody how to use it, and then two, they were so not qualified to teach it. Nor actually was their bell director, who was really an organist too. So they got on the Handbell Guild's website, read information about them and stuff, and at the time I was teaching a lot of workshops and stuff on beginning bells. So they said, do you want to come with us? And yeah. So I talked to a lot of bell director friends and people at the manufacturing store, people with music, and got a whole lot of stuff, all the equipment donated. And we took the set of bells to Lviv. I met with this incredible group of children every night for 2 weeks, for 2 hours a night.
Wow.
And if I stopped it early, the moms would be mad,
Oh.
because no, we brought them here for 2 hours of music instruction.
Wow.
And
How'd the children feel about that 2 hours?
they were really well trained.
Wow.
And these kids, the youngest one was 9, the oldest one was 14.
Wow.
And there were bunches of them. And so we learned a lot of basic musicianship then.
Okay.
And I worked with the music director's son was a pianist and really good musician. I worked with him also, and he kept that group going for years and years and years after I had been there. But I kind of really got into the idea of taking church music on mission trips, not the other. There's places for a lot of different things on mission trips.
Oh, yes.
And we, on a trip later, when the chapel choir went, I did a couple where I did VBS, but did it very heavily leaning toward teaching music and church music in particular. And then when we took a trip to Costa Rica, we took a set of chimes that we had donated and actually gave them to a school, and I worked with the music teacher there. 2 years ago, the Methodist Church in Bolivia asked for a music mission team to come and help them get started on the process of a new hymnal. And what I was told, they asked for musicians to volunteer. My pastor heard about it and said, St. Stephen's will send you if you would like to do this. So what I was told I was going to be doing was taking down folk melodies to then put to words to hymns so that they would be to tunes that they recognized. But then what actually happened when I got there was it was kind of the equivalent of annual conference, and it was all these pastors and some music directors who really didn't see any point in having a hymnal, because they said nobody can read music anyway, and music's really, really hard to read, and so why really do you think you need to do this? So what I ended up doing was the rest of the people on the team were musicians and not teachers. And so we ended up putting together lesson plans really fast, like overnight, and teaching the ministers how to read music, and teaching the ministers how to read hymns and how to read a hymnal and why you needed a hymnal and what a hymnal was for and that kind of stuff. And so we did that for a week, and then the next week we come in for the lessons, and the guy that was in charge says, and this week, and today Sister Venita is going to start teaching you how to write music. Okay? I asked them what sort of truths they thought their children needed to remember, and asked them to write down little 1 and 2 line things that they would like to pass on to their children. And then we put them in verse form, and then using the 5 notes that they had learned by then, set that to music. And so they actually did write some little tunes, and the team cleaned them up and put some of them together, and made. So at the end of our time there, I think the hymnal was still up in the air, but they had voted to do a songbook for the Bolivian Methodist Sunday School, which we felt like was a really good step in the right direction.
Wow.
Okay, then after that, then last year, a district superintendent from Jamaica contacted VIM in general and said, what's happened in Jamaica is the British Methodist, they've used the British Methodist hymnal for generations. The British Methodist hymnal has one hymnal for the musicians, and then it has one for the church people that only has words in it. It has no music. So over the course of generations, the musicians have died off and stuff, and they've got these hymnals with the hymns, the words, and nobody can read you can hear a different tune to a different hymn in each church because people just make them up. Well, the British Methodist, the Caribbean Methodist Church, which is an offshoot of that, then has come up with this wonderful Caribbean Methodist hymnal that's like that thick. It's got hymns to traditional Caribbean tunes. It's a wonderful, wonderful hymnal. They bought them, they gave them to all the districts in the Caribbean, but nobody can read the music. And they don't teach music reading in their schools. So this DS contacted VIM and said, can you send a team of, they wanted music missionaries to come and stay for 6 months and teach our people how to read music. And so Jeremy Bassett at VIM contacted me and said, is this something you could do? Could you lead a team to do this? And I said, yes, I could. And my associate pastor at St. Stephen's was Jenny Markham Kluel, who's also has a degree in music education. So she and I spent a week out there going around to churches, seeing what they needed with it. We put a team together last summer. We put 2 teams together last summer and taught, all day long music reading at 6 different churches in Jamaica. And one of my team members, who was a grad student in music education, actually then stayed in Jamaica between the 2 teams. And, well, anyhow, I took on this team Marcy Corey, who is now director at Piedmont United Methodist, but whose daughter is in the chapel choir here at McFarland. I needed Marcy because I didn't have somebody that could teach piano lessons, and so I asked her if she'd go, and she went. So she went, she had a great time. She came back, talked to her daughter Megan about it. Chapel choir here was looking for an international trip this year, and so they're now going to Jamaica.
Really?
Marcy is going to go with them, and they're going to go to Savannah Lamar, where I went. Started with the group last summer.
This year?
This summer they're going. So the whole thing has circled around and come back here.
Isn't that amazing?
And I think you're actually going, McFarland has several sets of bells, and I think you're actually donating one of them to one of the churches in Jamaica. I know Marcy was talking about that being a possibility.
I hadn't heard anything about that at all. We've kind of gotten a little bit removed from the teenagers since we're neither one teaching anymore.
Right. Well, they're doing the fundraising and the parking lot and stuff. But they're doing Jamaica. And Marcy isn't on the staff anymore here, but she is going to go on the trip as a sponsor. And she's kind of our liaison with the people from last summer. Wow. So it's just funny how things work.
Isn't that amazing? One thing I particularly wanted to talk about was your children's sermons. I cannot remember if we already had children's sermons or not before you started them, or if you really started, but I know that that's the only ones that I remember. And I remember so many times going into Sunday school. We always go to the early service, going into Sunday school and telling the class, just wait till you hear Venita's children's sermon. So talk a little bit about your children's sermons, because there was something about them. I think you had a direct line to the kids' way of thinking.
Well, I talk better to children than I do to adults. I don't know if they had done those before. I don't know the answer to that. The worship committee here at McFarland had, at one point, had a subcommittee that was working on ideas for making the worship service more child-friendly and involving children more. And one of the things that they wanted to do was children's sermons. And so Phil agreed to do them once a month. And he did a couple of them, and then he said, I don't know what to say to children. So I started writing them, and Phil would deliver them.
Mm-hmm.
And then after a year doing that, he said, why don't you just do them? So I started doing them once a month. And then when Dick House came, he said, let's start doing them every Sunday except when there's communion, because of the time thing. So what I tried to do with those was, and somebody told me what you're doing is a Cliff Notes version of the sermon. And yeah, I tried to get the topic that the sermon was going to be on and say it the way I would do it to a child. And sometimes I would write it out and then try to take out all the words that were more than one syllable and just do it with how I would talk to a child. I always had to keep my eyes focused on the children, because if I looked up and saw the adults, I would freeze. But I could talk to the children. And another thing of how one thing leads to another, people kept telling me, you need to write these down, you need to send them off to a publisher. And some of them were ones that, you know, I'd heard something else and turned it and stuff, and you know, I never did that. But I have, over the course of the years, worked at several church camps, mostly Lutheran and Presbyterians. And I guess next to the last year I was at McFarland, I was working at a National Lutheran camp, and the head of the children's division of Augsburg Fortress Publishing, which is the Lutheran publisher, was a seminar preacher. And anyhow, we were talking about things and children's sermons, and I said I did them, and he said, well, how would you do this? And I told him that and doing that. So then about a year later, I got an email from him saying, are you interested in writing Sunday school literature for the Lutheran Church? And I said, sure. So I guess it was VBS literature first. So now anyhow, I'm on the staff of Augsburg Fortress. They have a branch called Spark House that's their interdenominational educational literature. And so I've written Sunday school literature and VBS literature and stuff for them. So
That's in recent years.
yeah, that's as recent as the last one I turned in was December 29th of this.
Oh, this year. Okay,
Yeah.
wow. So that's out there, going to be out there this next
No,
summer.
it's already out. I've been working for them for several years.
see.
And my older daughter, Erin, goes to a Lutheran church in Iowa City, and she said, it was so cool. I walked in their Sunday school, and I went, I think my mom's name's on that book.
That's wonderful. Now, I hadn't told you I was going to do this, but we've mentioned St. Stephen's several times going along here, and I'd like to kind of venture into, I know that you have gone to, I can't remember exactly when you left here.
2009.
2000, so it's not very many years then.
October. No, I've been at St. Stephen's 6.5 years.
Okay. And I know that a lot of things have happened at St. Stephen's since you've been there, so kind of tell us a little bit of the highlights of your work with St. Stephen's.
Well, I started out very, very, very part-time as children's choir director, and then doing one adult bell choir. And at the time, I was also on the faculty at Mid-America Christian University, and they teaching music theory, music education. They had a set of bells in a closet, and so I said, "Can I take these out to St. Stephen's?" And they, sure. So we started on borrowed bells, and then this was in the 1st of October, and the next spring, and this bell choir had just gotten to where they loved it. Okay, the next spring, the head of the Department of Music at MACU decided he wanted the bells for his church. So suddenly we have this bell program and we have no bells. But we ended out, our pastor was Amy Venable, and she talked with, I think, every Methodist church in Oklahoma, and she found out that Crown Heights had a set that they weren't using. And they gave them to us on a lease purchase agreement. Then we were able to fill out the set later as a memorial when a person that was in the church that had been a big fan of bells died. Memorial money went to fill out the set of bells. And then when my mother died, they bought the set of chimes in her memory. So we've got the bells and the chimes, and we've now got 2 adult bell choirs and 1 youth bell choir.
Oh, wow.
And when the person who was director of music, who did the adult choir when I came on doing Children's and Bells, when he left, it was very sudden. It was the week before Palm Sunday. And so Amy said, would you be willing to be interim for a while? And I said, sure, I'll be interim, but I don't do adults. And I just made a big point of saying, I don't do adults. But I ended up having a really good time with those adults. They're just really
They're
fun.
kind of a group.
Yeah, and
an interesting group.
I'm kind of the interim that never left because they never said, okay, your interim time is over now. I'm still there.
Yeah.
And so,
and their director before that, was that David?
Oh, no.
No, that was a long time in between there. Okay.
Yeah, he was an intern when Mary Jo Ruggles was really sick. He was never director of music. Perry actually was interim director of music when I went on as children's director.
I see.
He had retired from here, and he was their
And
intern.
I remember you mentioning that it was interesting when you interviewed with him.
Yeah,
brought back
haven't I
memories
done
of
this before?
Interviewing at McFarland.
What?
I'd like to take us back to McFarland and talk about the thing that you got first, to walk around on and that sort of stuff that we were talking about. The
Labyrinth.
Labyrinth.
Would you have to do with that? Anything to do with the Labyrinth?
The Labyrinth and the Taizé services.
Oh, the Taizé service, yes.
Yeah.
That's all yours, wasn't it?
Yeah. Perry and I had seen Taizé services at several choir director workshops. And Phil had read about them and Kathy had read about Labyrinths and was really interested in that. A Methodist church in Pittsburgh, I can't remember the name of it, but they it had a nickname that was like the Pittsburgh Cathedral or something. Anyhow, they had a big workshop on they called it worship in 5 dimensions, and it was different types of worship services. This was also when they were looking at having the contemporary service here. It was, I guess, a year or 2 before that started. And they had this week-long workshop that was in the spring, and none of the clergy could go to it, and Phil couldn't go to it, so they said, well, Venita, will you go to it? So I went to this week-long workshop, and I love the Taizé services, and I understood a whole lot more about why you do them, what they do. There was a person there from First Methodist in Wichita, Kansas, who said, our Taizé congregation's growing faster than all the rest of it, and what they're bringing in is people from all over the area that have, in some way, shape, or form, been damaged by a church. Because Taizé it doesn't take on the personality of anybody. It has no visible leadership. The Labyrinth was also offered at that workshop as another form of contemplative Christianity. So for the Labyrinth, I brought back the books and the literature and the information, and Kathy Mash ran with it. and I told her, what they had done and stuff. The Taizé services we started doing them. We'd have one at noon and then one on Tuesdays. When Scott Sharp was here, the Taizé services kind of reached their peak because Scott and Tracy were very, very much into Taizé. They actually were married in a Taizé service, and they both had spent 2 summers in the Taizé community in France.
Yeah, mention that Scott was one of the associate pastors.
Yeah, Scott was associate pastor for a period then, and he even wrote a special communion service in the Taizé style. So while he was here, Taizé was a big deal. And we did have a number of people from other churches around. We actually had staff people from First Christian and some other church around that came to it, because it's an interdenominational service. The Taizé service is the only interdenominational service that's recognized by the Pope as truly interdenominational. And they were just very, very meaningful to me and to the people that were into contemplative Christianity.
I just didn't want us to forget about that, because that hasn't been mentioned at all in any of our interviews.
Yeah, and that was something that was very important to me. We do them, St. Stephen's does them on Wednesday nights during Lent, and so yeah, we carried that over.
Okay. That's wonderful. Well, I have reached the end of my list, and I know that there's so many facets of your ministry that there's bound to be things I'm going to think of that we have forgotten. Do you think of anything, any of your particular favorites that we have missed? Anything you're doing now at St. Stephen's?
Well, every summer I went on those choir tours with the high school choir and the high school bells, and I did take over the high school bells after a while. And I started the tradition of doing the palankas.
Oh yes.
I started that one because I wanted the youth to feel a connection with the congregation. I wanted them to feel that they were representatives of a group. And so palanca is a Spanish word that means crank or lift. And
It means what?
Crank or lift. And the forms, people would fill it out. We'd give them a list of the names of everybody that's going, and I believe you still do this. And people would choose the name of an adult or a youth, and then fill out this form saying, "I'm praying for you during chapel choir tour," and as a way to back up my prayer, I will. And then they would choose an action like, giving up sweets for a week, or reading the Bible every week, or praying for you at a certain time every week, or something. And I would collect them and then hand them out. There's a period halfway through a trip where the excitement from starting is gone and the going home isn't. You don't see it, and people have started to argue. And you need a time to remember why you're doing what you're doing. And so I would pass them out then, kind of as a reminder of who they were, what they were doing, and what the church was. And people kept saying, "Well, don't you want to assign people to pray for a certain youth or something?" And I'd go, "No, just look at it, and somebody will jump out at you." And I never had somebody left out.
Is that right? We never had one that was. Have you any idea how many trips you went on like that? How many mission trips or chapel trips or all together?
Okay. Well, I was at McFarland for 26 years, which means, by the way, more than Phil Finn or Perry White.
Yes.
And I didn't go on choir tour about twice. So 24 choir tours, 26 bell retreats, a whole lot of Wesley retreats, at least 20 Wesley retreats, mission trips, Brazil, Costa Rica, Alaska, Ukraine, and then little ones to New Mexico and Mexico. So, yeah, a lot.
It gets me out
A
of
lot.
It'd be interesting to write it down and see how many you've gone on.
Yeah, I know how many
Yeah.
different countries I've been to,
Uh-huh.
but they haven't all been mission trips. But, yeah.
How many countries have you been to?
24.
Wow.
Some with VIM, some with, the adult choir went on tours that weren't mission trips, they were tours.
Yeah.
And then some on Don's business trips. So,
Obviously, a lot of things, at some time you must have had to do things through interpreters
yeah.
and into communist countries, so
Well, Ukraine.
unfriendly countries.
When I went to Ukraine the first time, and I actually did go again later, but that first time we were talking about was 5 years after the fall of communism. And so there was a lot of influence left. There were people, I just learned things that I had not imagined. People that, the choir director, for example, in this one church, had gone through the state-sponsored music schools at the top of his class, and theoretically in Ukraine, there were not laws against Christianity like there were in Russia. But when he graduated, he was then told, because of your unfortunate associations, you won't be allowed to go on to the conservatory. He had gone up through the high school as the top student, and instead we've decided that you'll go to plumbing school. So instead he went to school to be a plumber. And so actually at this church, he was the music director and the custodian, and both. And he said, "Hey, I got really good training." But
Wow.
that's just something we would never ever
Wow.
have thought about.
Well, this is just fascinating. I fear I could keep thinking of things and we could go on and on. If you don't think of anything else, nothing else that...
No, I'm better if somebody gives me a trigger. I think you've given a lot of them.
Oh,
Thanks.
wow. Well, this has been just really, really interesting.
I've
and
enjoyed it. It's good to remember
Oh,
things.
yeah, it's good for remembering things for me, and I have so much enjoyed visiting with you, and I know this is going to be one of the ones that people will want to listen to over and over, because it's has so much wonderful information in it.
Well, I didn't even know you were doing this project. There's some of, I would like to see some of them too.
Yeah, I will have to show you our list. So again, I thank you very much, and we'll let Joe turn off the camera and